If I could get the trustees to take their seat, that'd be awesome. Do we have anybody on the phone at this time? Doesn't sound like it. Okay, I would like to call this meeting to order. And as our custom, I will acknowledge the territory that we are on and thank the Algonquin people for hosting us on their land. But as I do that tonight, I also would like to thank the student trustees for leading the Student Senate in a discussion around the introduction of the territory acknowledgement and how just simply reading these words week after week starts to ring a bit hollow at some point. And so I would encourage my colleagues for us to take the time over the summer to maybe think about how we can be bringing this land acknowledgement to life a bit better in this space than we have been over the last little while. And I will look for a mover to approve the agenda. Thank you, Trustee Huff. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That carries, and I will look to the director, to the chair for her briefing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This evening I have a number of items. First, Friday, June the 21st, 2019 is National Indigenous Peoples Day. You may have noticed the display that has been put up in the atrium. On this day at the OCDSB, we will celebrate the contributions and cultures of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and reflect on our ongoing commitment to learning truths and actioning reconciliation. And that certainly can include consideration of how to bring our land acknowledgement to life. Secondly, at a special board meeting on June the 10th, the board approved its 2019-2020 operating budget of $980.25 million and capital budget of $82.8 million. The budget is aligned with the board's 3 proposed strategic priorities and makes new investments of $3.5 million in a culture of innovation, $4.4 million in a culture of caring, $305,000 in a culture of social responsibility. Highlights of the budget include an $8.2 million investment in Wi-Fi infrastructure to ensure appropriate network connectivity is provided for students and staff, and the addition of 29 full-time equivalent teachers to meet needs resulting from enrollment growth and to respond to priority areas including English language learners and support for students with special education needs. Third, last week on June the 13th at 6 p.m., the district hosted our annual Community Recognition Awards at the Confederation Education Center. We were honored to recognize all of the volunteers who work in our district and to congratulate the following award winners. The Chair's Award went to Helen Crawford of John McCrae Secondary School. The Community Partnership Award was given to Doug Kendall and Grant Dillenbeck for their work at Frederick Banting Secondary Alternate Site. The Distinguished School Council Award went to Nancy Solange Paradine at Alta Vista Public School. Volunteer of the Year Award was to Kathy Laffin from D. Roy Kennedy Public School and to Donna and Patricia Amundred from Regina Street Alternative School. The Community Award was given to student Sylvia Key from West Carleton Secondary School, and the Excellence in Equity Community Award went to Sachiko Okuda from Gloucester High School. In addition, on a new note, I am pleased to announce that the International Baccalaureate Organization has now designated Maryville High School an IB World School. Maryville High School will begin the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program in September 2019. That's just 2 months from now. And finally, I would like to acknowledge that tonight is Charlene Hunter's last meeting at the OCDSB. Charlene has accepted the position of Manager of Communications at the Ottawa Catholic School Board, and we will all miss her very, very much. Thank you, Charlene, for all of your efforts on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I'll look to the Director for her report.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. June is Pride Month. Our OCDSB community has a rich culture and history of celebrating persons of diverse sexual and gender identities every day. Throughout the month of June, staff and students will participate in events and activities in schools celebrating our uniqueness. Ottawa's annual Capital Pride Parade will take place on Sunday, August 25th, 2019, and a proud OCDSB contingent of students, staff, trustees, and community members will be taking part. Everyone is welcome. Come out and join the OCDSB friends and colleagues. I had the pleasure of attending the annual Cappies Gala, which took place at the National Arts Centre on Sunday, June the 9th. Cappies Award winners are selected by high school student critics, and the evening featured and showcased amazingly talented students from the National Capital Region. The district was well represented, and I extend congratulations to Earl of March Secondary School, Wilfrid Laurier Secondary School, Colonel By Secondary School, Maryville Secondary School, A.Y. Jackson Secondary School, and Sir Robert Borden High School for outstanding efforts in the performing arts. On Thursday, June the 6th, a number of Black Ottawa high school students took part in a ceremonial march towards the next chapter of their educational goals. The Walk of Excellence signals the high educational expectations held by the Black community. The march was coordinated and supported by staff and community partners, and it began at Lisgar Collegiate Institute and ended at the University of Ottawa. The Ontario Public School Board Association has announced that Osgoode High School student Hannah Burrows is a recipient of the 2019 Jack A. Macdonald Award of Merit. The Jack A. Macdonald Award of Merit is awarded to an elementary or secondary school student attending an Ontario public school with an OBSPA member board for a sound academic record and outstanding community service and leadership. The award will be presented to Hannah at the board meeting on June the 24th. And I'm also very proud to announce that Sam Sharp, a student at West Carleton Secondary School, has been awarded the very prestigious Lauren Award valued at $100,000. Sam is co-president of her school's student council. She has worked with initiatives supporting tornado relief in her community. She has also helped to organize events such as Leadership Camp and Relay for Life. Lauren scholars receive tuition, annual stipend, and funding for summer internships for 4 years of undergraduate study. Congratulations to Sam. And that is all for my report.
Wow, thank you. Any questions on the Director's report? Seeing none, I will move to, so when we set the agenda at 6:45, we did say we would leave the delegation sign up open till 7. There are no delegations in the room at this point, but if somebody comes in the next 5 minutes, we will allow them to speak and move now to matters for action. 6.1, Report 19-064, Special Education Plan 2019 and Special Education Report 2019.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. And so I will turn these reports over to Superintendent Simmons, who will introduce his team and will help us to go through these reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm joined by System Principal Hannah, and we're pleased to bring to you tonight the final report for our special education plan and our special education report. As you know, it's an annual requirement for SEAC to review the special education plan, and trustees were asked to reference their materials from the 12 June SEAC agenda for reference to the two appendices. I am going to turn it over to System Principal Hannah to talk us through the process that we followed and to highlight the special education report, because it is something that's a little bit different for us this evening.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I'm very pleased to share that this is an annual task that we're required to take on. So the special education plan is our requirement to report to the ministry what our programs and services are for our district. I'd also like to share that it's a little complex insofar that there are many different individuals who can access this information. So when it's written for the ministry as that task, but also it is our communication to the community, to our families, and also to our board staff internally as well about all the different services that we provide. So it is always an annual review piece, so it's always a work in progress, and there's always going to be room for improvement as we continue to review it annually. And we do look at it every year through our SEAC meetings, where we consult with all the individuals at that table and have those opportunities to have those conversations and review some of the content and or listen to some next steps and some feedback to incorporate. So that's part of that work. Because we're in 2019, we are at that year where we are to provide a special education report. So as per the regulation, it stipulates that this is a document that we are to provide, providing an overview of our services and supports, and we are to provide this every year, every second year rather, on the odd year. So we are that year this year, and that's why you have that special education report in your possession for your review, which also needs to be approved and then passed to the ministry. Our timelines are by the 31st of July of every year is when we're required to submit the special education plan, and in those odd years, the special education report in tandem with the plan. And we continue, as I shared, to really take that opportunity to review the content, but also to make it that user-friendly piece. The feedback that we continue to receive is that the language in it sometimes is very much that edu-speak or not sort of always accessible for all individuals. So again, a lot of work was put forward this year to try to make it a little bit more user-friendly with some visuals and so forth, but I will acknowledge that there's always room for improvement. So we will continue to do that work as we move into next year. So I think that's it, and if there's questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Madam Chair, so the final piece is just a reminder that our special education plan and report are a reflective piece on the 2018-19 school year. So keeping in mind that it's a report to the public and the ministry about the special education programs and services that have been provided this current school year. Thank you.
Trustee Campbell.
Really, I have no comments or questions, Madam Chair, but through you, I'd just like to thank staff for all their work. I've been a witness to how much effort has gone into this over many sessions, and I know I'm not even aware of all the time spent in the back room. So it is the collective effort, and I really appreciate the, in fact, constant staff messaging that this really is to be seen as an evergreen document which can continue to improve. So thank you very much.
Did you want to move the recommendation while you were talking? Great, thank you. Would you like introduction? Are there any other speakers to this item? All right, going once, going twice. Okay, seeing no other speakers to this item, I will call the question, or would you like wrap up actually, Trustee Campbell? Great. I will then call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation on folio 4? And that carries. Moving to 6.2, Report 19-067, Adoption of the OCDSB Education Development Charges Amending Bylaw.
And at this point, I'd like to call on CFO Carson to take us through this report.
Through you, Madam Chair. Trustees have in front of them this evening report number 19-067, which relates to the adoption of an amendment to the board's currently in force EDC bylaw. You'll recall that the current bylaw was passed by the board in late March in order to ensure the continuation of the collection of charges. The rates which were approved under that bylaw were unchanged. This was a result of provincial changes made in October 2018, which served to freeze EDC rates at a level no higher than those currently in force. Immediately after the adoption of the board's new EDC bylaw on March 29, 2019, the province announced a set of new legislative amendments which provided school boards with the ability to impose rate increases. Residential rates would be restricted to a maximum yearly increase of the greater of 5%, or $300 per residential unit. Non-residential rates would be limited to a maximum yearly increase of 5%. In accordance with the above, staff are now recommending that the board revise its current EDC bylaw to increase the rates. An amending bylaw, which was prepared in conjunction with the board's solicitor and its consultant on the project, is attached as Appendix B to the report tonight. The amending bylaw would serve to implement rates that were calculated within the EDC background study: $787 per new residential unit and 58 cents per new square foot of non-residential development. In order to remain within the legislatively restricted rate increases, the non-residential charge would be phased in over a 3-year period. The rates assume a status quo with respect to the policy decisions which helped shape the current bylaw. The adoption of the amending bylaw would ensure that collections over the term of the bylaw will be more in line with forecasted financial obligations, and any shortfall in revenue incurred would be reduced in size. If approved by board, the amending bylaw would be implemented 5 days after passage by board on June 29th, 2019. All interested stakeholders, including the Ministry, the City of Ottawa, our coterminous school boards, the development sector, have been notified of the proposed amendment. A notice of advertisement was also published in both the Ottawa Citizen and Le Droit newspaper. Staff is here tonight to answer any questions trustees may have regarding the report and the recommendations.
Thank you. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to move the recommendation that starts on page 9 and continues on to page 10.
Would you like any introduction?
Just to say I thank staff for the report and for the presentation, and I think it's well done and pretty clear. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Other speakers to this item? Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question. I'm very pleased to see this. I note that at the bottom of page 4 of the report, folio 8 in our package, that staff have been calculating the shortfall that has resulted from having the temporary freeze between the time that that the new bylaw took effect and now. Do we have any idea of the magnitude of that shortfall yet?
The shortfall is in the order of just over $100,000 currently.
Thank you for that. Is that expected to increase? It'd be more by the time that the new bylaw takes effect?
Yeah, it would increase. It would increase not on the residential side, but on the non-residential side as that rate is increased over that 3-year period.
Thank you for that.
Trustee Lara.
So I have 2 questions. The first question is, given that we have a shortfall from the lowered amount when we passed it in March and now, would it not make sense to raise the residential one, which I believe we can raise a little bit higher, a little bit to cover that shortfall?
What we're depending on with this is what was recommended in the background study. That was what was consulted on. That's what we went out with to our community partners. And so we want to align with that. Also, our bylaw was passed previously to make sure we
Fisher has joined.
to make sure we stayed eligible and to have that eligibility remain. I think it was 4 days later we got the new regulations in from the province, and so we want to stay within the windows that they afford us. And so with that, we think it's wise to go with what we rely on, and that's that extensive background study that all 4 boards in this region relied upon.
Okay, thank you. My second question is about page 14, paragraph 3, subsection 2, subsection again. So it lists exemptions to the EDA charges. And it has municipality, district school boards, universities, farms, places of worship, and farms again. And my question is, why is it that religious charities are exempt but other charities are not? And is that something that we as a board might be able to look at?
So I think what the trustee is referring to are the non-statutory exemptions that are included within the bylaw. Those are a set of historical exemptions which have been in the bylaw as long as it's existed, and those just are the standard ones that have continued to sort of be in there.
We do from time to time get requests for exemptions to paying. Thus far, we have held the line and had all people pay who are not specifically exempted in this bylaw. It doesn't mean that those things aren't considered one-on-one as the requests come in, but they represent a fairly, it is a fairly small amount of money, but those do come in on a case-by-case basis for consideration.
So my question was, why is it that we exempt some charities and not others? And is it something that we as a board are able to revise?
Again, we'd have to go back to change that background study. The time for that sort of investigation, even though we have a bylaw in front of us to consider now, was likely before we went out for consultation with that background study. It doesn't mean it can't be considered now, but what we are trying to do is make sure that we have a bylaw in place that is in line with what the provincial regulations allow us to do right now and not reopen that background study. So that's why I suggest to you that if you have an inclination to have that sort of consideration, it can be more broadly considered on the case-by-case basis as people request it when they come in for exemption, rather than having a standard exemption. I understand your question, why not broadly? Simply, it has not traditionally been so, and that was not reflected in the calculations.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify what you said a little bit earlier, you said that so far no exemptions have been granted?
That's correct. We haven't granted exemptions.
All right. Thank you so much.
Seeing no other speakers to this item, I will see if Trustee Blackburn would like wrap up.
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, then I will call the question. All those in favor?
Fisher in favor.
And that carries. Thank you very much. And we will move on to 6.3, Report 19-070, New Fernbank Elementary School, Approval of Opening Grade Structure Program and Attendance Boundary.
And we will have Manager Ostafishuk continue.
Thank you. Madam Chair, through you, you have before you a report where planning staff is seeking approval of staff's recommendation regarding the opening grade structure program offering and attendance boundary that we'd like to set for a proposed new elementary school to be opened in the Fernbank development area. In addition to creating this particular boundary, we're also looking to amend the existing MFI boundaries for the area. Just as a bit of context, Fernbank is a new residential area, sort of that gap between Stittsville and Canada that is rapidly filling in. We're looking at an 11,000 home build out in the area, and currently to date we're looking at about 2,400 new units that have been pulled. The new elementary school site in Fernbank for construction is currently the highest on our list of capital priorities. And we are still awaiting that call from the ministry for submission of the capital priorities. We have not received it yet. The majority of the students residing in this Fernbank area are directed to John Young Elementary School in the Glencairn area of Canada. Currently, John Young is overcrowded. It requires 11 portable classrooms and is running at a utilization rate of 134%. That's only anticipated to grow. So although when we proposed this particular consultation, we didn't know, and we still don't know when that capital call will come, but having the site in hand, having the boundary and grade structure set, should set us in a better light as far as a business case goes when that capital call does come in. So we had an approved report with a timeline and working group, which was formed in January of this year. We had school council representatives, principals, board staff, representatives from various local community associations, and we had a broader consultation on May 23rd at John Young, which summarized the findings of that working group. Indeed, there were 3 working group meetings proposed. I think the boundary setting and discussion was so clear to the working group and members of the community that only 2 of those 3 meetings were used. So the proposed plan would be to open a new school once approved for construction to be a dual-track kindergarten to grade 6 facility, offering both English and early French immersion. The school's attendance boundary would be comprised of the portion of John Young's elementary school boundary located west of Terry Fox and the Carp River. The boundary would include a significant amount of the future Fernbank area, and that was done deliberately. Within the package, we have as Appendix A, there's a general location map. Certainly we know that taking in all of Fernbank for this particular boundary is not going to be a sustainable thing, but as we get the other school sites that are in the area, there are 4 of them in this boundary total, it calves off this existing boundary nicely, so it makes her a logical progression as the area grows and as we have more elementary schools built in the area. Even though we're looking at a K-6 school, we'd like the school to open K-5, thus preventing the 3 schools in 3 years for the grade 5 students. So that's something that we traditionally do. Because John Young is so overcrowded at this point in time, we, as part of the consultation, spoke to the public about doing a block move. Oftentimes we try and grandfather as many kids as we can within their existing school, but in this case, with the opening of the new Fernbank school, we have suggested that the K-5s move as a block. We have also, as I noted, proposed a change to the MFI boundaries. Just to sum that one up, we want to make sure that Stittsville feeds to Stittsville. We want to make sure that Canada keeps feeding to Canada, so the difference between A.Y. Jackson and the new Stittsville High School. And so that boundary is also in the package as proposed to have been amended. The input received, as I said, it was a pretty smooth consultation as far as this one goes. The only thing that I would note to you, and again, you might see it on the general location map, Trail West, which is a small community south of Fernbank and west of Eagleson, a little triangular package at the bottom, which is quite near the proposed new school. The residents of that area did very much, they were interested in being part of the Fernbank attendance area, but again, we wanted to keep that clean between a boundary between Canada and Stittsville, and that Eagleson Road, Terry Fox does form a part of that boundary that I think is locally recognized. So I would note to you that there was that desire expressed. It was something that was looked at by the working group, and they decided to leave that boundary with John Young. So the recommendations are before you, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you. Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to staff for the report and for all the work behind the report. I would like to move the recommendation that's on page 29 of our package, page 7 of the report.
Would you like introduction?
Yes, please. Just to add to what Manager Ostavichuk has already said, the working group meetings were extremely smooth in my experience. There was no question that we needed to establish a new boundary, no question that the part of the Fernbank area immediately around the location of the new school should attend there. They did look at a number of other possibilities, but it was pretty clear that in the longer term, the option that is presented here is by far the best solution. Indeed, some of the residents from the Trail West community would have been interested in having their children directed to the new school when it opens. But at the same time, there was also consideration of the fact that the area immediately around John Young Elementary School is a maturing area with a decreasing number of students, and that it would be helpful to John Young for the continuing growth in the Trail West area to be able to attend there, even though the school remains overcrowded, seriously overcrowded, until the new Fernbank School is built. Overall, I think staff did an excellent job presenting all the data and a lot of patience in listening to all the questions and finding answers whenever they were needed. Special thanks to David Suriano and Megan Faraday for that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other speakers to this item? Seeing none, would you like any wrap-up, Trustee Scott?
None required, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. I will then call the question. All those in favor?
Fisher in favor.
And that carries. And we are moving on to item 6.4, Report 19-068, the 2019-2023 Strategic Plan.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I will take this opportunity to make some opening remarks before inviting the staff team to do the formal presentation. This evening, the staff team will present to trustees the updated draft of the OCDSB 2019 to 2023 Draft Strategic Plan entitled Building Brighter Futures Together. The presentation tonight is a culmination of almost a year's worth of work. I'd like to thank the staff leadership team for their investment in this work, as well as to thank Michelle Dagnino and Jorge Hurtado of Lura Consulting for their masterful facilitation of our discussions to synthesize a great volume of thoughts into the formation of a plan. Trustees, your forthright direction, challenging questions, and insistence on a plan that reflects the realities of our students and school communities has motivated and inspired the work that brings us to this point. Driven by the mandate to develop a multi-year strategic plan that is courageous, hopeful, and resilient, we have drawn on multiple modalities for input from the community in order to understand what worked in the OCDSB's previous strategic plan, how our community's perspectives and realities have changed, and what to consider in the development of a new plan that will be a driver for positive change in the board. We have learned a great many things about effective instructional practice to enhance achievement outcomes. Along the way, we have also learned that in addition to excellence in instruction, well-being is also a key factor in success for students and for staff. We know that a sense of value, belonging, and autonomy are necessary contributors to well-being, and that meaningful and relevant work are key factors for engagement and success. This is true for our students as well as for our staff. As we consider leading our district forward on the road ahead, we have sought and pondered upon the input and feedback from our communities, staff, and students. We have reflected on what we have learned from our previous strategic plan, and we have explored the research in education, leadership, and strategy development. What we present today are 3 drivers for the work ahead: a culture of innovation, a culture of caring, and a culture of social responsibility. I am reminded of the famous quote attributed to legendary management consultant and writer Peter Drucker, who said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," highlighting the notion that a powerful and empowering culture is a surer route to organizational success than even the most carefully crafted strategy. Building brighter futures together puts our focus on building the cultures that will foster excellent strategic actions that promote imagination, integrity, responsibility, high performance, and a wholesome sense of self-worth in our classrooms, staff rooms, offices, schools, and school communities. Tonight, we're presenting the 3 key drivers of the plan and the key goals presented in the context of their emergence. The goals are simple in presentation, but signal complexity in delivery, as we will all collaborate on emerging actions to deliver on these goals to achieve the desired outcomes. This strategic plan has been designed and presented to be agile and iterative. We will draw from the core of the plan to drive our actions. Annually, we will consider our success and measure impact in order to adjust our actions going forward. The actions derived from our strategic plan are not tasks, nor are they reflective of a to-do list. The actions derived from the strategic plan will be intentional to the goals and will be adjusted as we learn and measure for impact. I present these thoughts as a background to the presentation and the discussion of the draft 2019-23 strategic plan. At this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Executive Officer Michelle Giroux and Strategic Business Analyst Halcyon Joseph Close to present present the report and to support the discussion. Over to you.
Thanks very much. Good evening. We're delighted to present our new strategic plan. We've got a presentation for you, and I think we're just having a technical difficulty, so Manager Pranari Hergert's going to try operating from the other side of the room. The letter of transmittal is on page 51 in your package, and it's got quite a bit of detail about what we learned in the process and how we will proceed with the implementation of the plan. We're not going to go into all of that detail for you tonight, but we are going to touch on the highlights and some of the things that's changed. So, new plan, the director talked about the structure of it. We've been talking about our journey. We started this journey about a year ago this time, and in that year, what a great opportunity for some research and reflection. And we've learned so much in that time period from the rich feedback and input we had from the community through thought exchange, through those focus groups, and also in the discussions with the board and senior staff. And hopefully we've reflected all of those things as we've gone through. We came to you at the start of May and presented a draft plan and took that plan out to the community. And we put some questions to the community. Did the plan reflect their feedback? Does it point the OCDSB in the right direction? Do you see yourself represented in the plan? Is there anything that would help to move the goals more forward? And how will the community know what we did that we did what we said we're going to do. We've had great feedback. We had really extensive feedback from our principals, lots of questions and lots of reflection on that by the senior team. We've had good community feedback, and our feedback in response to the survey, I have the numbers in the report, but good feedback from all 3 groups, from our students, from our staff, and from our parent community. And I think one of the things we can be proud about in the development of this plan is how much we've grown student voice in terms of the inputs to the plan. So just want to highlight some of the big revisions to the plan. You'll see that we have revised some of the language in the goal statements. We've restructured the format of the plan to provide a little bit more detail. We've improved the graphic design and layout. We've created more connection to the exit outcomes in the layout and design of the plan. We have some additional information included in terms of how the monitoring and measurement will work, and we have more information around performance indicators. And those revisions are all built around the kind of feedback we received, both in the discussion at the Committee of the Whole table, but also in the feedback we received from our stakeholders. So how will we make this happen? The thing that we really heard from folks was really in the how. Lots of questions and reflections. And sorry, it's hard to see that in this room, but I'm going to take a minute and read you a couple of these. So these three thoughts are three actual thoughts that we received in the feedback, and we just pulled them so you'll see the richness of the input we received. So 1, my reaction is that the plan looks good, but I would like to see more specific strategies. Possibly that is coming in the operational plan. I'm hoping to see more about the direction and the connection between the three: culture, innovation, caring, and responsibility. And the third one, action in terms of specifics is needed. Best practices have become a groupthink and herd barometer when once there were goals which we aspire to. It is also the edge that pushes innovation, which people talk about in glowing terms, but try to frustrate and limit when put into action. So you see the comments there about the struggle of how do you create this culture, and then will you sustain it, will you live it? And we've spent some time as a senior team talking about those things. You know in the plan that we built it around this idea that education must not simply teach work, it must teach life. That was a predominant thought, whether it was stated expressly that way or not, in the early part of the consultation and all the way through. And I think that those three areas, innovation, caring, and social responsibility, really embody what we're looking to achieve there. We were asked for a bigger connection to the exit outcomes, and you'll see in this version of the plan, we've built that into the front end and dedicated some space to making sure that we're not only talking about the exit outcomes, but very expressly describing what they are. And that really helps to make that connection, both to our goals, but in terms of our system understanding about the exit outcomes. So visually, a new representation. So we've branded the plan itself with the logo on the cover. And then as we move through, you'll see in that diagram, there is an icon. So an icon for the culture of innovation, an icon for the culture of caring, and an icon for the culture of social responsibility. And really wanted to have that capacity to have icons that could stand independently, so that when we're working with principals, with school staff, and we're talking about particular areas or when we're monitoring progress, we've got some visual identity.
Mark Fisher.
As left.
There was lots of conversation around how to build an implementation strategy with a strong accountability framework. We started talking about that in the board and senior staff. What could that look like? We've explained the senior staff have been doing a lot of reflecting on that, a lot of discussion about the cadence of accountability and the implementation and operationalization of the plan. Where are we going to put our focus? How do we get started on this work? How do we move from X to Y and by when? How will we measure progress? What are the difference in the kinds of measures, and what do we look at as we're monitoring, and what do we look at as our end goal? And how and when will we report? You asked some questions about where does the plan sit in our broader architecture. We've created a new graphic that helps to explain that. So our strat plan, those are KPIs. If we just go to the monitoring. So our strat plan sets the vision for 4 years, and that's going to be supported annually. The board already establishes a board work plan annually, and that work plan sort of highlights when the board is monitoring fiduciary responsibilities and key work that's planned in the year. And then we're moving in this plan, we're moving from what used to be known as the director's work plan to what we're now calling strategic action plans. Those will be done annually. We spent a lot of time talking about what those look like. And then connected to that is the board improvement plan and school learning plans. And as we talk about what those strategic action plans look like, we've also been looking at the design and structure of the board improvement plan. How do we align it with the priorities we're setting, but also how do we structure the board improvement plan in a way that sets a system direction and makes it easier for schools to look at their school level data, look at the directions in the board improvement plan, and move more quickly to strategies that help support move in that direction. Should allow for easier process in school learning planning for our schools, but also greater cohesion in the way we're moving forward in the areas we're moving. Have also added departmental work plans, and all of this work is designed to see the progress move on student learning and well-being, right? That's what we agreed was the foundation of our work. We've built in a diagram about monitoring progress. From the outset, we talked about the importance of having a strategic plan that was good for the classroom and for the boardroom. So you'll see when we talk about monitoring progress, we talk about what does monitoring progress look like at the board level, what does it look like at the district level, and what does it look like at the school level. And one of the things you'll notice in there is there's a combination of quantitative and qualitative work. And a lot of folks have asked us questions about how will we monitor innovation. And at the end of the day, you know, as I mentioned, we're trying to move the needle on student achievement and well-being. But innovation is part of what we're going to be looking at in the monitoring. And lots of the research around innovation talks about reporting on qualitative data, reporting on user experience, storytelling, storyboarding, journey mapping, some of those pieces that really get us as we're moving through the plan, sharing the stories about what it looks like as it comes alive in our schools. So we can look forward to more of that. There was quite a bit of discussion at our last meeting on the key performance indicators, and you'll see that the key performance indicators have a mix of new indicators and some that you'll be quite accustomed to. So in the case of culture of innovation, quite a bit around student achievement data, but one of the new measures is around parent, student, and staff experience, and that will come from some annual survey data. The other thing that we need to be mindful of as we go into the fall is we've got great capacity in terms of reporting on student achievement data, but this fall we expect to undertake our identity-based data collection. And so over the course of this plan, our capacity to disaggregate the student achievement data and get a little bit more specific in terms of who are our students and what's happening to some of those groups of students will come much more alive over the course of the plan. In the culture of caring, we look at the school climate data, and you'll also see that there's more emphasis on employee engagement data. And that's a piece that we've really tried to pick up in this plan, right? As we talk about making statements of culture change, that really gets at culture of the workplace and culture of the learning spaces. And important evidence there. And finally, in the area of social responsibility, you see key performance indicators in terms of social emotional skills. So again, we'll begin that data collection this fall in our work with the OECD. We talk about leadership diversity. We also talk about disproportionality indices. So again, disproportionality indices will, our capacity there will arise out of the collection of identity-based data. So some new measures coming into our process. And finally, environmental stewardship. We have only one example there, but we heard the conversation quite clearly when we were here in May, and that was we need to think about the range of measures we have for environmental stewardship. So we're working with the facility staff and other departments to think about what could that look like as an index. One of the great things about having a team of people look at this and a team of people interested, and I think one thing about this plan is it does seem to be engaging people's interests. When we think about the feedback we got from principals in response to the plan, much richer and much deeper than what we've seen in the past. So while there were lots of questions, the plan clearly captured their imagination. Halcyon and I spent a couple of days holed up really talking about dashboarding and what could it look like. And we finally got to the point in the day where we said we just have to step away. We've done a lot of good thinking and a lot of good growth, but we need to walk away for a few minutes and think about what this looks like visually. And if you just move to the dashboard image. And we walked away, and I literally walked away and walked outside when Anton, one of our research analysts, approached me and said, if you have 10 minutes, I can show you what I've done, and I think you're going to like it. And what he's done here is created a dashboard. And again, I'm sorry, it's hard to see these with the lighting in this room. But on the left-hand side is the key performance indicators, the KPIs, and on the right-hand side are the desired outcomes. And so this is just an image capture, but Anton has created this for each of the 3 culture statements. And when we finish this part of the presentation, we'll actually go in and click on it so you can see what it could look like. And I'll come back to that. So a lot of thought about measurement and what that could look like. The other thing is we started to do some research on what some of these pieces are, and particularly innovation, because that's the area where there were lots of questions. So the OECD has been doing some interesting work on innovation, and I had a chance to meet with some folks at the OECD, particularly from the Observatory for Public Sector Innovation. And just last month, I think it was in April, the OECD passed a declaration for public sector innovation, which is something that public sector organizations that are interested in innovation can adopt, and something we might think about. The OECD also has the model, the facets of innovation, that talks about different types of innovation. And what's interesting about the facets of innovation model is we've also been talking about strategic enterprise risk management and how we align those things. And when you look at facets of innovation and we think about managing risk, all of a sudden we have a framework to make some decisions about innovation and what innovation projects are small and which are bigger and what kind of results can we expect. So there's some really good thinking and some great tools. And the last piece in terms of their work that is very interesting is this idea about the skills for innovation. And what's interesting about the skills for innovation is it talks about storytelling, it talks about curiosity, it talks about user centricity, data literacy, iteration. You see a lot of, when you look at the description of those things, a lot of commonality in those skills for innovation that we see in our exit outcomes. So we're early on in the research piece on some of those things, but there is lots of great information in there for us to draw on and lots that will inform our work. So I'm going to move out of this and just go to the dashboard to show you how it interacts. And again, we've been able to set up the dashboard, but we don't have any data in it, so it's not going to be live. It's just going to show you what it looks like and how it connects. And you know, this is our first step at this. There's lots of opportunity and lots of iterations to go in growing this work, but thought you might be interested in seeing what that looks like. So there it is, and you can see now it's a little bit larger. So if we move around on the left-hand side, you see that each of the things we have identified, this is culture of social responsibility. And so you'll see that the KPIs
Mark
for social
Fisher has joined.
The KPIs for social responsibility are moving sort of from the upper left around the circle towards the bottom. And on the other side, you see the desired outcomes. So you'll see when Diane clicks on there, we're making the connection between, and I can't read that from here, system decision making and client satisfaction. So you see how those things connect. So what will happen here, if we had data supporting this, is you would see all of the connections, the data sources and the desired outcomes would connect, and the size of the band at the circle edge, so at the outer edge of the circle, would increase depending on what the data looks like. Again, hard to read when you're not, when it's not populated, but just wanted to make sure that we were clearly expressing that we're already on our way in terms of measurement and monitoring and thinking about what it looks like. If you move across the top bar, Diane, to the culture of caring, at the top there, click through there, you'll just see that the image changes, similar model, and there'll be a few ways that we can represent that. But as we've explained in the report, there will be more opportunity for us as we embark on the plan once it's improved to finalize and formalize some of this work, and we're looking forward to one, your feedback on the plan and hopefully approval of the plan next Monday night, and then the creation of the board work plan in early September. Before that happens, the senior team will have undertaken our work on the strategic action plans, and then going into the fall, another PD session around monitoring and measuring to grow that capacity. So I'm going to pause there and happy to respond to any questions.
Great, thank you. Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to move the recommendation.
Would you like introduction?
Yes, briefly, and then I have a couple questions. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate staff and all those who contributed to this for all the work put into it. I know it has been a long time in the making, and I really do sense that the staff, especially at CORE in the effort, have been very authentically engaged in this, and they're really trying to walk the talk in terms of making sure that this is a strat plan that can make a difference. That said, it remains relatively high level and aspirational. It has some important and positive messaging, I think. I guess the kicker for me will be whether it's having the strat plan will make a marginal difference on the ground. So I think really the challenge for all of this really is to make sure that this plan actually is meaningful in practice as it's implemented. One of the things I do like, and there was some PD on this, is, as the director suggested, that it's meant to be to take a sort of an agile and iterative stance, and I think that's great. It's modern and fresh, but more than that, it means that if we discover something new, something we really should be tracking, something we should be paying attention to, we don't have to wait until the next strat plan to start to look at that. And so that's a fleet of foot stance, which I very much like. A couple of questions through you, Madam Chair. One is it refers to, under goals, strategies, outcomes, and key performance indicators, to the BIPSA and how student achievement data in the board improvement plan for student achievement, and that student achievement data is in the BIPSAs, but we don't have well-being data then, do we? Or what's the status of that? And then I have one other question.
So in the interest of managing long acronyms and complex processes, we use the expression BIPSA. We actually currently use the expression BIPSA, which includes well-being. And there are some places where I think we just talked about board improvement plan to make it clear to people what we were talking about. The director has been leading us through a discussion about what that board improvement plan looks like, and I think we have lots of information in there around the achievement data and achievement expectations, and there still is a well-being component, and we're still talking a little bit about the shape and structure of that, but schools do have a requirement to set well-being goals, and today we were looking at the district-wide results for the school climate data and talking about how do we take that and start doing some planning with that and look at that and do some messaging and build that into next year's plan. So it's definitely still there, just reflected a little bit differently. And well-being data will come up in a lot of the caring measures.
Thank you. I can see some of the social emotional stuff maybe feeding into that, as you were saying. Yes, it's my pronunciation. It's Bipsaw, not Bipsa. I guess one of my concerns there, just on follow-up, is whether all of our schools are reliably setting such goals and whether they're challenging enough. And I think that might be something for us to be able to look at. Thank you. And then my only remaining question at this juncture again goes to the page 58, key performance indicators again. The current list of KPIs is referred to, and it does refer to that following the approval of the plan and allowing for further discussion and exploration of strategic and tactical data sources, deciding which data best provides strategic overview necessary to support the board's accountability may be a work in progress. So what I'm gathering from what the staff are proposing effectively is that those KPIs that are sort of marquee KPIs at this point really should be seen as really interim KPIs pending further research, development, and discussion. Is that more or less correct?
I think they're, some of them are more solid than others. I think for the most part, you're going to see all of these KPIs going forward. What I think we've been trying to visualize is when we're reporting, what's the difference, those reports we've been bringing that we talk about as measurement reports, where we're monitoring, which go in there and which go in a wrap-up report. So which are kind of annual indicators and which will be progress pieces. And something like school climate data is a good example because we use it a bit for both. So we need to go a little bit deeper in that school climate data and say, which pieces have we've been using in the past to identify some things, and what do we look at as the big roll-up, right? And then we might have, like the overall school climate data is an indicator of something, and then this particular measure is an indicator of something else. So that's the sort of next layer of thinking.
More measures might be added as part of a cluster. Okay, thank you.
Or clarity brought out, yeah.
Trustee Huff.
I would like to thank you for this incredible piece of work. I think we all are in awe of the amount of work that's gone into it. I have a few comments, and I'm not sure if I'll actually get to a question or not. I'm a little bit like that. I come to this table from the background of a researcher. I have done a considerable amount of research, both qualitative and quantitative. My concern surrounds the issue of innovation, and are looking at the key performance indicators there. In your own words, we are looking at things that look very familiar to us, with the exception of the survey data. We are looking at, from your description, looking at the qualitative sense, getting an idea of what people are feeling about the process of innovation and innovation practice. I think we're ready, as a board, to step forward with some real research. I think we're ready to actually take innovation on. I think we need to start with some cataloging of innovative practices that are already existing in our board. We need to be looking at evaluating the impact and efficacy of those practices. We need to be looking at issues of scalability of those practices. And from that, we can move forward to what are meaningful performance indicators in terms of the success and the impact of innovation in our board to our students. We can actually examine best practices. I'm really not concerned about attitudes about best practice. I'm really concerned about the efficacy of best practice. I want to see what we can expect from innovative teaching practice. What is the limit of that? What are we doing now? Where can we go with it? I think that there are ways that we could be promoting innovative teaching. We could be recognizing the contributions of innovative teachers in our board, building that in to some sort of recognition for staff in terms of innovative practice. I just think that there's really room for us as a board to do some actual research, to set up some studies pilot work, if it needs to be, in conjunction with perhaps the universities or the colleges in town. We have some wonderful educational institutions in this city, and there's no reason why we couldn't partner to do some head-on research as opposed to just be capturing people's opinions about whether or not our innovative practices are having an impact and making people happy and reaching goals. I think it's really time to get in there, count the cats in Zanzibar, run some analysis of variance, look at some regression data, and see what's happening in these classrooms, what the impact is, and whether or not we can make a change by looking at best practice. So I guess I didn't actually get to a question, so just a comment then. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Lyra.
Am I correct in assuming that this is the forum to make amendments if we wanted to see changes to the strategic plan?
You are.
Okay. So I took the draft strategic plan that we were given last to a number of parent councils that I happened to be at, and I got a very strong message from a number of parent councils, including First Ave and Viscount, that environmental issues are very important to parents in our community. They're very important to our school communities. And I really do think that we should have the word environmental in the title of a culture of social responsibility. And so I'm going to propose an amendment to the draft strategic plan as it stands to change the heading of culture of social responsibility to culture of social and environmental responsibility.
Would you like any further introduction to that?
I think I introduced it reasonably well, but
Right.
I might go back on the list if the debate gets heated.
Is it friendly? No, it's not friendly, so can we just have you repeat it so that we have it up on the screen?
Culture of social and environmental responsibility.
Okay. So I will start a speaker's list on the amendment. Trustee Blackburn.
Madam Chair, may I have a staff comment?
I certainly appreciate the emphasis on the environmental aspect of social responsibility, and we've heard that message loud and clear throughout, and we were very conscious of that in the revisions and also in the creation of the icon so that there was strong visual connection to the environment. I guess I would be mindful of two things. One is the simplicity of language, and we moved from citizenship to social responsibility, social and environmental responsibility. There is beauty in simplicity in some respects, but it's really a value statement. And the other thing I think to be mindful of is if we look at environment independently as a word, it might appear as frequently as learning appears as a word. And so I absolutely agree that the environment is a very important message, and I think we've tried to capture it, and I totally respect the board's ability to put that forward. That's the trade-off that we went through and the thinking that we went through in how we presented the material, and so that's the best I can do, is share what our thinking was as we move through the process.
Just a quick follow-up. So if the, I assume parts of this will be in branding and communication, and I know it sounds like a simple thing, but so sometimes you need it to be short to get it onto something. So the word, sadly, the word environmental is quite long. So just something to think about as we move forward. And for me anyways, I mean, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I think it's captured in there. And I do agree with the executive officer that if you look at the icon, to me, that's pretty clear that it speaks to the environment. But again, not a hill I'm prepared to die on.
Okay, Trustee Penny.
I would agree with the previous speaker's assessment that there's beauty in simplicity, and that, if we're going to base our whole strategic plan and change it based upon the attitudes of a couple school councils, and certainly we probably want to add some words to the culture of innovation, call that the culture of innovation and learning, and the culture of caring, we want to call that the culture of caring, and probably well-being. So we could go on and on. I would rather have it simple. I think it's true, the environment is, environmental concerns are encompassed in social responsibility. Indeed, I think when you think of that, the word environment is the first thing that pops into my head. So I would actually rather have it a little simpler, a little more clean. That's just what I would like. Thanks.
Trustee Campbell.
I guess similarly, I'd like to keep it simple, but as well, I don't necessarily want to pick a dominant winner subcategory in one of these pillars. I mean, if I had my druthers, I'd make it cultural caring and equity or something like. So we could I guess, and is equity not important? So I just think we could get into a very long debate, effectively discussing relative priorities for the school board. There are a lot of important aspects to this, and a lot of time was spent on putting this together. The environment's present, and I think it's an authentic presence. So I guess I'm disinclined to make this change, and but I will say, if this passes, then I'll be wanting to make other changes. And I'd rather not go down that road.
Trustee Lara.
So we sat around this table a week ago, and I heard many of you say that you care deeply about the environment, and you cared a lot about environmental and making sure that the school board was environmentally conscious when we were discussing the budget last week. And so I do think it's important that we put the environment somewhere in in the heading or in the first statement. So if this, I'm willing to see some sort of sub-amendment that we include the word environment instead in the sentence that says we will strengthen our community through ethical leadership, equitable practice, and responsible stewardship. If somebody wanted to move a sub-amendment to put the environment in there, I do think it's important that we have environment either in the title or in the sentence defining what it is that the heading is sort of about. So I'm going to jump back off the list and let other people.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with several of the previous speakers around the notion of simplicity and keeping our culture statements comparable in length, easy enough for people to remember the whole thing, and having a sort of rhythm to them so that they do stick in people's heads. In terms of the addition of the word environmental responsibility, that to me sort of narrows the concept of environment and environmental, frankly, because environment, when we talk about environmental responsibility, usually we're talking about the physical world and what we should be doing to preserve it. But in the context of our schools, environment goes to far more than that. It is not just a matter of looking after the physical world around us. It is also a matter of looking at the social and emotional climate in which our students and staff are doing their work. So I hesitate to insert environment into this top-level statement because I would be concerned that it would actually narrow the vision somewhat. And I think it's better where we have it within the context of our goals, and certainly it is going to show up in a number of places within the context of the action plans that come out of this. I think that there's not a person around this table who doesn't value and see as important the notion of environmental responsibility. The question is whether it belongs in the top statement here in the context of the whole strategic plan. So I think I cannot support this amendment.
Wait, other speakers to the amendments? Oh, Trustee Huff, sorry.
Thank you. I think that I too feel the same way, that there may be some loss in terms of lengthening the title of the cultural social responsibility heading. But I do think there is one place where we could, although these points of our goals listed under each of the three headings are not necessarily ranked, there is a subconscious ranking when you see a listing of things. And I think that it might be helpful to move the final point under culture of social responsibility, which is foster sustainable stewardship of the environment and human and financial resources, to move that up and drop down the model responsible and ethical leadership and accountability, such that it comes up as the second major point. And I think that that might be a middle ground that we could get behind, because I think it really does, when we read a list, we do read that list with a rank order understanding of that information. So bumping it up the list might be a way that we can meet both needs.
Great. So we can't do that at this point because we have an amendment on the floor, but once this amendment has either passed or failed, we can look at other amendments. Any other speakers to the current amendment? Seeing none, would you like any wrap-up, Trustee Lara?
So I would have liked to have heard from the couple of voices around the table that didn't speak to this, but I thank you to those that did. And I'm going to encourage my fellow trustees to remember all of the students this past fall who marched out of classes in protest to the lack of environmental action.
Great, thank you. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? And that fails. Trustee Lara, you still have the floor.
Okay. I have one other amendment I would like to make, and that is that we change the statement at the bottom that says we acknowledge our district is unceded and unsurrendered, and I've scribbled the rest of it out in an attempt to fix it, to we acknowledge that our district is on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin or Anishinaabe peoples and the colonial history of school systems in Canada. We will work with the traditional stewards of this land on reconciliation and decolonization. And I will send that to you in writing if you would like. In writing, yes.
And I'll just ask if it's friendly as we know. Yeah. Kind of assumed that was. Would you like some introduction, Trustee Lara? Yes. Great.
So I have spoken with a number of members of our First Nations communities, with a number of members of our Indigenous communities, and there are beginning to be conversations about how acknowledging that you are on somebody's land and acknowledging that you are going to work with them to try and improve systems that impact them are different things. And I really think that we as a school board should be moving towards admitting historical fault and admitting that we should be working with the communities that are impacted to instead make the systems less colonial, and to work with these people to see that they are less impacted by the systems as they exist. So I'm going to let Catherine get it back up on the. I had originally considered putting this forward as two motions, one of them with the first sentence and the second one with the second one. Because I'm pretty sure the first one is more likely to pass. I don't think that's how you spell stewards, is it? Okay.
Spelling is overrated.
Yeah. As a school board?
It's called.
Okay.
Okay, so we have said that's not friendly. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you and to staff. My concern about this one is, because we've always just said Algonquin people, so I just like some background information on adding Anishinaabe if that's appropriate, and if it is, that's great. If it's not, then I just need clarification on, because this is a big decision. I think we're doing the latter. The problem for me is when we put that in and then, because the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, first of all, they're very distinct groups, and within those distinct groups, there's not common understanding of what the solutions are. So I think we leave ourselves open to, well, you're not doing it my way, so you're supporting colonization and you're not into reconciliation, but I could be off on that. But I do look forward to my colleagues' comments on that, and maybe I'll change my mind. But I do need clarification about the Anishinaabe situation, please. To be more than I talked to a couple of people. I might just have to abstain if I don't have the information.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I may. So recognizing, I do believe I understand the spirit and the intention of the adjustment, and I think it's connected to the earlier comment by our chair tonight regarding meaningful statements around reconciliation and commitment to collaboration with our Indigenous communities and First Nations. The caution that I would share, and I think Trustee Blackburn has signaled it, is being careful about constructing language in the absence of the Indigenous voice to give us a sense of whether or not this is indeed the appropriate action to or language to capture that spirit. And so I would be inclined to indicate that rather than simply default to what we've always said, but in the spirit of a more meaningful statement, if we can be entrusted with the opportunity to bring that spirit of intent to our Indigenous leaders in our education circle to help us with language that might meet that spirit, but again be something that we can be assured will be acceptable and reflect the vision and the voice of the Indigenous community.
Okay, thank you for that, Director. I will just then note it might be appropriate for somebody to try to send this forward to next week, at which point in time we could have possibly attempted to do a bit of consultation on this wording. I'll move to Trustee Penny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really couldn't have said it better myself. I think that when you put something on the front page, it really has to be very well thought out and very well developed. I admire the spirit with which the trustee is putting this forward, and I totally agree with it. I do think, though, it does require a fair bit of review. And you know what? If we have to revise this even after next week with a proper statement, then I'm okay with that. You know, like I think it's better to get it right rather than to get it fast.
Trustee Campbell.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm open to some wordsmithing and deepening of the commitment here, but I'm also, I guess, concerned about the wording, perhaps, and I'd like to see consultation on this done. Perhaps it's more to do actually with the first part of the second sentence, because it suggests, and maybe this is the intent, or is not, I don't know, only working with one Indigenous people in the board for, as opposed to others, and there are a number of Indigenous communities in the board represented, a number of Inuit, etc. So it may not be their precise land that we're on, but this seems to speak, as I understand it, to really working with one set of people. I don't know if that's the intent, but yeah. So it's just maybe a wording thing, because you refer to this land and the land is, right? So the stewards of this land, etc. So I would just again want to be clear what it is that we're after here, and I would personally rather that it be more open and inclusive, and maybe that is the intent at the end of the day, but maybe this is something to come forward later. Thank you.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the remarks of previous speakers on this. Just looking at this here, I think we've got a problem in the first sentence in any event, because our district is not on the colonial history of the school systems in Canada, so it just doesn't read particularly well. These are very difficult statements to make right. There are a lot of sensitivities among different groups in our Indigenous communities to what would be right from their point of view. And rather than get this wrong, I guess, through you to staff, I would like to ask if this is actually part of the strategic plan per se, or if this is intended as a new statement for us, or a possible new statement. And if it's the latter, would it not be better to leave it as is and have our Indigenous Education Advisory Committee have a look at the language and come to some recommendation that we could then incorporate, not just at the bottom of the front page of our strategic plan, but also into many of our other documents? So staff comment on that, please.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I think what we wanted to do, making this statement on the document, was to acknowledge our Indigenous heritage and to acknowledge the lands that we are on. I don't think that I think we thought it was important that that statement be in the plan. I don't think we thought of it as a part of the plan per se. So, for example, if in the course of the life of the plan and our work with the Indigenous community, the language changed, then the statement might change to reflect that, in the same way that the statement we use in the boardroom or at the start of meetings might change or grow. Having said that, I think the director has indicated, there's some merit in, if we are going to make a change, then speaking with the community and making sure that the change is reflective of the community's interests and perspective.
Thank you.
Trustee Huff.
I'd like to start, first of all, by thanking Trustee Lyra for bringing this forward. Thank you. It's important, I think, that we step back and take time to reflect on things that we are just throwing out there as lip service. It was mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, and I have felt for a very long time that we give lip service to this issue. Having spent nearly a decade of time working in Indigenous communities, I think it is very important to capture their voice, to understand what we need to do in terms of addressing the history of colonization, in terms of really coming to grips with what reconciliation means. So I think that as an important cultural entity that this board is, I think it's important that we set leadership in this regard. I do think that wholeheartedly this is part of the plan. This isn't just a tagline, this isn't a footnote, this is wholeheartedly part of the plan. And I think that it fits as fundamental elements under culture of caring and culture of social responsibility. This is one place where we can start to do what we're saying we're going to do in this plan. We can actually approach people, get input, have a meaningful statement on the front of our strategic plan that says we care about this issue. This is an exemplar of what we are going to do and the leadership that we are going to provide on this issue and on every other issue that we bring forward as a board over the next period of time for which the strategic plan will hold. So I would definitely recommend that we take this out, we get some input on it. I, like Trustee Penny, do not mind if that input happens 6 months down the road or 3 months down the road, and that this footnote becomes a living legend at the bottom of our strategic plan in a meaningful way. I don't mind the wait time, but I would really like to see the end product be meaningful and profound and really true to the statement of what we're trying to do, and to build the partnerships that we're talking about with our Indigenous partners. So I'll shut up now.
Okay, I just will note that there's no amendment on the floor to remove it from the front page, so it's currently either the iteration that is on the front page or the iteration that is behind us, and that's the amendment we're working with. And I would just have one question from the chair. I've heard a few of my colleagues suggest that we might make a change 3 or 6 months down the road. Can you tell me in the last 4 years how often we reprinted our strategic plan and what kind of printing runs we do of this document?
The current strategic plan, I don't know that we've changed any of the content, but we've probably printed it I'm going to say hundreds of times, because we print in small, we do a mass printing at the beginning to manage distribution, and then after that we print copies as needed, depending on the nature and the use, and sometimes that's done internally and sometimes externally. So I don't know that I have metrics per se, but
Just also, I notice when I'm in schools, we have a large copy framed in every school, sometimes more than one place within the school.
And
I'm
that
just
we try
wondering
to
what
do-
changes is going to look like if we start doing that.
so that we try to do only once. That's where the big cost investment is. So obviously we'd want to sort out what the language would be before we would make that kind of change.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Lyra.
Yeah, so I want to agree with Trustee Huff in that I do think that this statement is part of the strategic plan. I took it as that when I set out to amend it, because we are discussing amendments to the strategic plan. It seems to be in order. So I also recognize that we are going to do a big print run once, and I've heard what Trustee Penny has said about waiting a little while. I would like to see this, and I know this is a very short time frame, but I'd like to see this discussion happen so that it does come out with our first big print run, so that it does come out with in all of our strategic plans, because I think it's really important that our commitment to our Indigenous communities is front and center in our strategic plan, and that we don't print something less than it could be, and then have consultations for the next couple of years, and then not really center it as much as I think that we should be.
Trustee Jennings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Trustee Lyra, for bringing this to our attention. It is important that we get this right. Anishinaabe means, is more of, it originally means original people. So I think we need to get it right. It's a term that sort of describes a number of tribes within the Algonquin word. So if we're going to make changes, I do think we need to get it right before we go to first print.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think it's important to get it absolutely right, but I also know that we haven't changed our previous strategic plans. However, this is a new strategic plan, and hopefully this is going to be an agile strategic plan. And I personally think that if there's something in our strategic plan that needs to be improved, we as a board should not be afraid to change it just because we approved it one way in June, when it's obvious that a change is needed 6 months from now, or 3 months from now, or however many months from now. I mean, the bones of the plan, I think, are probably not going to change a lot, but the bits around those bones certainly can change. And this is a key thing. I think it is important to get the language right. I think Trustee Lyra is on the right track here. The challenge is there merit in making a change to this draft tonight in the here and now, when we are uncertain as to whether the language that's proposed is actually going to be the right language, or is it better to stick with the language that is here, which I think we can be probably reasonably assured is okay language, but incomplete language. So is it better to have something that is okay but incomplete to which we can add, or is it better to have something that might in fact not be quite right, even though it's heading in the right direction? So I think that's really the thing we need to be considering. But if we want to change this down the road, yes, we certainly should be able to do that.
Okay, Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. I'm wondering when this statement was put on the front page, especially I'm thinking if it was on that draft document that went to the Indigenous Education Advisory Council?
It was not on the draft document. It was added in the redesign as we were looking at the feedback and pieces we thought would bring value to the plan.
Thank you. I only asked, I just wanted to know if we had feedback from that advisory council. And I'm wondering, I don't think they're meeting this month. I'm just wondering how staff might move forward in getting counsel from the members of IAC on this matter, because this will be news to them as well from what I understand.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So the approach that staff is likely to undertake would be to go back to our staff Indigenous leads to give us some guidance around how it is that we might engage with members of the community as well as elders who may give us some feedback on that. There is a very current conversation about land acknowledgements, as you are very aware, and the question not being necessarily just the words being right, but also the words being alive and the words having authentic meaning. Just yesterday, there was a piece of information that came forward about, of course, there's an app for everything. So now there is actually an app for, I think it's called My Territory or something to that effect, that does actually speak to not only the land acknowledgements that are appropriate for particular geographical areas and groups of people, but it also has representation from those groups of people who speak to why those words have that meaning. That is not to say that we would simply use an app, but what it is to say is that there is some agility around how it is that we would engage with this language. I think that there is a question here about the notion of the signal to the fact that we want to engage with multiple ways of knowing, which is a part of what our Indigenous communities have been teaching us, and it would not be unthinkable for us as each time we run it to actually reflect different ways of acknowledging the land, and so that while it is that there may not just be one way, that in multiple runs of the representation of our strategic plan, we may indeed see more than one way of acknowledging the land and the community, and that does speak to the notion of agility. So just to go back to the first question, it would be reaching out to first our staff Indigenous lead to give some direction around those connections and the acceptability of some agility around how it is that that language is represented, just to ensure that rather than getting it perfectly right, that we don't get it wrong.
I appreciate that, and I'm just wondering, as we look, and I'm thinking deferral for a month, a week. I guess just a comment from staff if they think, well, I won't. I will be moving a deferral. Hopefully staff will have an opportunity to connect with some of the people in the community. But if that's not enough time to do this, I would hope that we might consider asking the Indigenous Education Advisory Council in the fall what they think. But I'm very cognizant of making sure we don't get it wrong. I would have trouble supporting this without knowing that we've connected with that community and have their best advice on this. So I'd like to move a deferral to the board meeting of June 28th. I don't. What the next board?
Just to clarify,
June board meeting. Yeah.
Is that a deferral of the item or a referral of the motion to staff to seek clarification if we can and report back?
Thank you. Referral would be what I would be asking for.
Great, so we have a procedural motion on the floor, which is a referral for this amendment to staff to seek clarification on it and come back to us next week, Monday. when we have this item in front of us at board. We don't debate procedural motions. So I will call the question on that. All in favor of the referral? And that carries. So the speakers left to this item will not speak to it because we have now referred it to next week when hopefully we have more information. Other speakers to the strategic plan? Trustee? I don't think so. I think you've used your 3 minutes. I can put you back on the list as a second-time speaker if you like. Trustee Schwartz.
I just wanted to comment that I really like the work that's being done here. I've shared it with a number of my school councils, just coming from one now, where we've discussed sort of the content. Everybody that I've spoken to has really appreciated sort of the focus on culture, on students, or changing culture, I should say, and really the students at the center of things. I haven't had any feedback to say we've missed the boat on anything that, aside from one stakeholder in particular, which I believe is also being communicated with you, Michelle. But I just wanted to say I'm very much fully supportive of what I see here, and I think this helps us to drive forward for the next 4 years. Just one additional comment that I want to make, which I made during the strategic planning discussions, was when we're completed this, I'm very hopeful that in the reports that we get, we see the linkage back to the strategic plan. And again, when I've discussed that with my communities, they've really appreciated that kind of thinking, that it helps us to really focus in on the pieces that are important, what we're delivering and why. And so, but I just want to say thank you very much for really great work here.
Great. Trustee Huff.
Our discussion about the proposed amendment to the cover language just had me thinking about this idea of this document being a living document, of it being accessible and breathing on a daily basis. And I would like to make a recommendation to staff that we embrace this idea of innovation and maybe downplay the importance of the printed version of this document and actually go to a living, functioning document that exists on our web in real time, where when there are changes made, that those changes become active visual additions with commentary and explanation as to why we have amended our what has led us to this point where we're changing something, adding something, subtracting something, taking a different direction from this strategic plan, such that people see our living process as we move through the next 4 years. And I think this could be a really good example of, this discussion point came forward. We took it out for consultation. It allows a little bit of transparency to the process that we go through in our work to the communities to say, okay, this is how we're doing this, and we want to present this to you and give it to you for feedback and commentary to make it, to live what we're saying that we're going to do and to use truly innovative practice in terms of this document. It's not a piece of paper. It's not a piece of paper framed on a wall. It's a model that we are using to direct our work on a daily basis, and that lives. Anyways, my thoughts.
Great, thanks. Trustee Lara?
I just wanted to thank my colleagues for the discussion that we had. I was going to thank everyone at the end of the last one, but I didn't get a chance to. So thank you for what I see to be a healthy debate. I think it's important that we discuss ideas, and even if my motions don't end up passing, I think it's really important that we discuss these things in a public forum. Thank you.
Seeing no others, there we go. Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to express huge appreciation to staff and trustees for getting us to this point with this document. Changing a culture is not an easy thing. Over my time as a trustee, I have seen culture within the OCDSB shift, but it has never been intentional. This is going to be the first time that we are actually setting out intentionally to move our culture forward in a variety of areas. And to me, that has always been one of the reasons why I ran for election in the first place, because I do think that our culture of education has to change if we're going to keep up with where the world is now and where the world is going, even though we don't know exactly where that is. When we can have a plan that embodies a variety of areas of flexibility, of agility that will allow us to shift and respond so that if things aren't working the way we hoped they would, we don't have to wait 3 years or 4 years to make the change. To me, that is in itself a huge cultural shift. Hearing at this table someone saying, maybe we shouldn't just have it all there nicely printed and nicely framed and posted up in schools, is a breath of fresh air. One of the things when I visit schools that I always look for is to see how much of this student's artwork is framed and wonder how old it is and how long it's been up there on the wall. If we want our kids to learn the way they need to learn, if we want our staff to work the way they need to work, we need to make sure we're always looking forward and moving forward, and that has to be embedded at every level of the organization. The custodians, the office assistants need to be able to have their own ways of honoring the intentions and goals of our strategic plan. The teachers in classrooms need to be able to honor how our strategic plan can be moving forward. It is not something that is going to be running from the top down. It is going to be something that is running on all levels all the time. And I hope that we can approve this plan, and then we're going to have our work cut out for us for the next 4 years.
Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to thank all my colleagues and all the staff that work so very hard on this process. It is a long process that involves many, many hours from many, many people. I didn't get to kind of finish what I wanted to say about the other thing we were talking about, so that we've referred, but I would be curious to know if we even had that conversation, had staff not chosen to include the statement on the front page. I'm glad they did, but I think statements are fine on the front page, and clearly to what Trustee Scott had to say, I think if the statement we were using was inappropriate, we would have found out by now, because we've been saying it for many times in different meetings. But I would be cautious about putting an action statement on the front page specific to one group, because we have many groups that feel sometimes that their needs and views are marginalized. But I agree with Trustee Scott. This is a beginning, not an end, and we have over 3 years to work together to make this to come to fruition, and I look forward to doing that with my colleagues and with staff and schools. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Trustee Jennings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank the staff. I can see the progression of the plan from the retreat back in February, the number of hours and thought that have been put into this. So thank you very much for it's a beautiful piece. I just have a question on the feedback, and I just wonder if you have specific answers to, there's some that don't see themselves represented in this plan. Do we know why they don't think? There's a few somewhat represented, moderately not at all. Do we know why they don't feel like they're represented?
So we're just looking, it's hard to break that down beyond just the demographic. We only have the demographic question, right? Which group do you belong to? So we can definitely go back and look at that data and see when we break it down by group where it is, and come back to you also and tell you about the number of folks, right? Smaller number. We'll take a look at that.
Okay, seeing no other speakers to this item, I will look to Trustee Campbell for wrap-up. Okay, then I will call the question. Oh, yes, Trustee Evans.
Did we not defer this till next week?
We deferred the amendment to next week, so when this
Okay.
comes in front of us, it will not be a consent item, and it will need to be brought back onto the floor so we can relook at that amendment.
Thank you.
Yep. But we need to pass it in order to send it to board. All those in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? Abstentions? And that carries. And we are moving on to reports from statutory and other committees. 7.1 Audit Committee. Go ahead, Trustee Schwartz.
I'd like to move that the Audit Committee report table dated 22nd of May be received.
Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question on receipt. All those in favor? That carries. And 7.2 Advisory Committee on Equity. Trustee Ellis?
I'd like to move receipt of the report of the minutes.
Thank you. Is there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question on receipt. All those in favor? And that carries. And we are on to matters for discussion. Item 8.1, Report 19-063, Learning Disabilities Specialized Intervention Program, LD-SIP, Monitoring Results.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. We have Superintendent Simmons here who will help us guide us through that report and questions.
Madam Chair, I'm joined by Manager Kay for the presentation in relation to the report that you have before you beginning on Folio 87. A little bit nervous since technology failed and this is our first attempt, but what can go wrong? So I guess we use this. I think I just figured out what can go wrong. Phrase it up. Oh, look at that. The joys of being 5'6". Thank you, Associate Director. So carrying on. What you have before you is a discussion report as we continue to look at our implementation of the Learning Disabilities Specialized Intervention Program and using it to continue to look at ways to inform our next steps. I will apologize at the outset. Our program evaluator, Steve McKibben, is not able to be here with us this evening, and he is the architect of a lot of the statistical and evaluation measures that have come forward. So if you do have those specific questions at the end, we can either take them down here or you could email them for follow-up, but we won't be able to address the specific statistical analyses that has been done in creation of this report. To get here tonight, we have we did review this report with our LD steering committee. It was not in their hands early enough to provide a real detailed response, but they did provide one to trustees today. We have not had a chance to go through that yet, but we will be going through that moving forward. Just in terms of a bit of history for those of you new to the concept of LD-SIP, prior to 2015-16, we engaged in an LD review. Our previous Learning Disabilities Program, or LDP, was a grade 4 to 8 construction with junior and intermediates put in the same class. We engaged in a variety of review activities, and those were presented in a report to trustees back then. And the recommendation at that point was to move forward with a structure that we have called the LD-SIP, LD Specialized Intervention Program. It is a half-day program with age ranges of, in the junior, grades 5 and 6, and in the intermediate, thank you. I think you had it. Perfect. Thank you for that. Two grade structures, grades 5 and 6 and grades 7 and 8. We have junior and intermediate programs in each site. Being a half-day program, it affords students the opportunity to receive specialized intensive support during their LD-SIP time, and then an opportunity to practice or generalize those skills during a period of integration in the regular classrooms. Throughout both of those models, our capacity has remained the same. The goal of the LD-SIP is to provide a learning environment to target students' understanding of themselves as learners and compensatory skill development essential for ongoing academic growth. We know that an LD student has average to above average intelligence, and the goal is to provide intensive remediation and the development of compensatory strategies with the aim of maximizing student independence, academic achievement, and well-being. And we do that through a variety of ways, but we use curriculum as the main vehicle for skill and strategy development and to enhance the students' metacognition and their awareness of themselves as a learner, trying to create structures for them to be successful upon return to a regular classroom. I'll turn it over now to Manager Kay to talk us through a little bit of the program monitoring.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. This report does summarize the results of a 2-year program monitoring plan. The activities represent formative evaluation with the goal of guiding our implementation. It's important to note that these do not represent a robust review, which would not be appropriate at this time given the stage of implementation and program development. With more time, more sophisticated program monitoring and research opportunities will be developed. It's important to note that the 2-year plan did include both qualitative and quantitative measures with areas of key focus that included student well-being, compensatory strategy development, executive functioning skills, self-awareness and self-advocacy, as well as measures of academic achievement. It is quite a dense report that is in front of you tonight. Many of you have had the opportunity to go through this in more detail through our SEAC discussions. I will highlight some of the key results. In the quantitative program monitoring, in the second year of program evaluation activities, there was a non-standardized test of academic achievement, the WIAT-3. Overall, this did show overall increases from pre to post-test in the areas of reading, mathematics, and writing, with statistical significance being achieved in the area of reading. It is important to note that this was a non-standardized version in that students were able to access their assistive technology as outlined in the IEP in the post-test portion. In addition, in the first year of our implementation, there was a parent-guardian survey. Some of the key highlights is parents did note improvement in the academics of their child. However, they did report continued challenges in the integrative setting. We did definitely benefit from a partnership with the University of Ottawa and specifically with Dr. Maria Rogers. This research collaboration yielded a specific look at social emotional functioning of our LD-SIP students. And some of the key findings that we did present in this report indicated that our LD-SIP students are below the norm in most areas of social emotional functioning. that teacher ratings were higher in the low ratio environment than in the integrative setting, and finally that in the low ratio class setting, teachers were able to achieve higher levels of on relationship scales. With respect to the qualitative program monitoring, we did conduct structured student interviews where they did report that the demands of the low ratio setting were in fact easier, less stressful, and easier for them to self-advocate, and that the integration did pose more significant challenges. Staff focus groups represented the large team that does incorporate the service delivery model associated with the LDSIP. So that included our LDSIP teachers, our learning resource teachers, administrators, and members of our multidisciplinary team. These focus groups did highlight some of the implementation challenges and logistics that did present with this very unique and innovative service delivery model, and we are happy to report that certainly this participatory model of program evaluation has led to improvement even in the 2 years of implementation that we are reporting on tonight. To walk you through some of our implementation highlights, there was robust program development that did occur prior to the launch and during the first year of LDSIP implementation that really did leverage the robust multidisciplinary professionals that our district has. A significant amount of release time was dedicated towards building staff capacity through central professional development activities as well as school-based collaborations. The amount of those opportunities has been a challenge in the second and third years of implementation based on continued challenges in terms of releasing our staff. The model associated with LDSIP has also provided a vehicle to develop innovative transition support materials. Specifically, the LDSIP has led to multidisciplinary student profiles and self-advocacy cards, which have assisted the reintegration to the regular program following the LDSIP involvement. We have conducted some very initial enrollment trends. 2 years certainly does not a trend make, but in the data that we have looked at so far, we have noted a significant increase in the number of referrals that have come forward for this program in each year. As Superintendent Simmons did highlight, the LDSIP is formally a one-year program with the option of a second year. The vast majority of our students have accessed the second year in the LDSIP. And our very early analysis of the secondary pathways that students are accessing indicates that approximately 2/3 of students are going on to access secondary pathways that typically lead to the completion of an OSSD. In terms of our next steps, Learning Support Services is certainly committed to continued trend analysis as the LDSIP continues to move forward. We are in the process of investigating longitudinal student achievement measures. We are certainly looking at methods of building staff capacity that will importantly address the integration component of the LDSIP. That certainly was a highlight across stakeholder groups and one that we are committed to further facilitating. Which leads to that focus on transition supports and the combination of resources and tools that will allow for successful reintegration into the regular program.
Thank you, and bringing it to a close, on Folio 99, there are some guiding questions to help facilitate the conversation tonight, and we'd be open to hearing the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. Superintendent Simmons, you mentioned, and I'm just looking for clarification, in your opening remarks that capacity has remained the same Is that the capacity from the previous congregated model to staffing capacity for the LD-SIP as it currently, under its current enrollment and placements?
Madam Chair, that's the number of pupil placements. So it was 112 pupil placements in the previous program structure and 112 in the LD-SIP.
Okay, thank you. I'm assuming that a student needs an IPRC to be IPRC'd with the LD exceptionality to qualify for this program. This would be after we tried some tiered interventions, and then there'd be the LD, there'd be an IPRC, that would be necessary next step, and then how then does a student having the IPRC be moved into considering the LD-SIP program?
Madam Chair, so the current process, the student would have typically a diagnosis of an LD or specific learning disability in reading, writing, or math, or some combination of them. As they progress through, that's probably the wrong way to phrase it, as we continue to review their progress throughout various interventions, the school team, in collaboration with the parents, may determine to make a referral to our referral committee for the special LD-SIP, the specialized program class. That referral committee would then also, after the school has had conversations at the multidisciplinary team level, at the school level, the referral committee would then take a look at it, because at those committees, that's our spaces where we have really highly specialized knowledge, and they would provide their opinion back to the IPRC regarding placement in the LD-SIP, and then the IPRC would make the decision on the level of placement, in this case being fully self-contained. My apologies, partially integrated.
It was mentioned that there seems to be good student learning for the half day that they're in the smaller classes, but the challenge of reintegration even at the LD-SIP location is challenging, and that you may not have that many students who have reintegrated into their home school. But I'm wondering if you could, if there's a difference between what we would be doing to support the teacher in the classroom from a student who is in or has taken the LD-SIP, as opposed to a student who has been identified with the exceptionality of a learning disability and has not gone to the LD-SIP, the support that we give to the teacher for that student in that classroom.
Madam Chair, many of the supports would be similar. However, in our LD-SIP program, they do have half the day of intensive supports of a special education teacher in the LD-SIP, and then opportunities to generalize those compensatory strategies in the regular class. So the supports aren't exactly the same. In our LD-SIP sites, we've increased our learning resource teacher, or LRT, supports to help further enhance the supports that might be available to that student in an LD site versus what might be available in a school without an LD-SIP.
Are we finding that the knowledge of that exceptionality at the sites that have the LD-SIP is greater? We have a better capacity there than we would see at a school that doesn't have that?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure we could make that statement in this situation. One of the things that we have identified through the course of this formative evaluation is the need to further enhance students experience in the integrated setting. So there is still work to be done there, and that will be one of the things that we're going to turn our heads to coming out of this report, trying to figure out ways that we can enhance that. Once we go through that process, it is foreseeable that what we learn there could be scalable across the district. As we enhance our knowledge, things that are really hard today become natural practice over time, and we slowly build capacity that way.
It's mentioned that you're seeing an increase in the uptake of this particular strategy. I noticed that, I guess, would we be looking at opening additional centers, or is there opportunities for additional classes in the centers that we have now? And you can put me back on the list, please.
Madam Chair, this year through academic staffing, we did actually increase an LD-SIP program at a site because our referrals had gone up of students who we believed could benefit from that program. Additional programs would be, they'd have implications for us through staffing, but it is something that we do through Manager K on an annual basis. You'll recall that when we went through the academic staffing process, we were using language like we've asked schools to predict how many referrals you might anticipate coming forward, and then trying to provide you with that information to help make the best decisions at a given time. That would be a process that we would see continuing moving forward without committing to whether we would be adding or not. We don't currently carry a wait list for our LD-SIP.
Trustee Lyra.
So I just have a quick question about the metrics that you've been using, because the LD-SIP program has a smaller class size, and you said that previously, all the metrics that you've shown is that compared to previously, people are doing better. And my question is, what sort of metric are you using against a small class size without an LD-SIP support program? Like, so we know that students in small classes do better, and I'm wondering if you have compared it to just a small class without the LD-SIP supports.
Madam Chair, we haven't done that as of yet.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, what is the cost to the board higher, lower, or about the same compared to the congregated model that was used previously?
Through you, Madam Chair. It is early for us to have a definitive answer to that. Certainly some of the initial analysis that we've done with our partners in the finance department is that this model is most likely the same, or in fact more expensive than the former LDP model. Some of the significant costs that are associated with the LD-SIP are that we did learn through implementation that the students do integrate into regular classes for approximately half their day, and in some cases that led to class sizes that were deemed to be unacceptable. So there were additional regular classes added to those sites to accommodate the integration portion of the LD-SIP. So that, of course, in turn increases staffing.
Thank you so much.
Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. Trustee Lyra took a couple questions. I don't know. That's great. They're done. I guess what I'm interested in an ideal world, we would have sort of a cost benefit analysis and be able to show causation, maybe with controls. This may be an ideal world. I don't know what's actually achievable, but it would be nice to know. I have to say the structure of the program makes intuitive common sense, in that you supercharge the kids with advice and empowerment, and then see how they do, and then work that. With respect though to your I guess one of your concluding comments, you had mentioned that looking forward, you'd be looking at perhaps improving the experience in the integrated piece, as I understood it. And that actually goes to one of my questions, is what is done now? So for instance, is there good collaboration between the integration teacher and the smaller LD class teacher in terms of collaboration and this kind of thing? Does the regular teacher have specialized training as well? And when a student comes back, are they basically debriefed in a sense by the LD teacher? So what went well, what didn't, this kind of thing, to sort of maybe workshop that and that kind of thing. So I was wondering if maybe staff could speak a little bit to that piece of it.
Madam Chair, one of the things that we did hear from staff is the challenges with respect to time to do that collaboration. So it's one of those things that we're going to have to turn our heads to in terms of how we can make sure that time to collaborate is in place. Certainly when students return from an integrated period or time into the LD SIP, there is that follow-up, because teachers will be using that to determine what are the next steps I need to do to put in place. So for example, one of the things that we hear is students were expressing some challenges with respect to using voice-to-text software because of the noise in the integrated classrooms. So that would be information that we would want our LD SIP and our LD SIP teacher and our LRTs to be aware of, so that we can start to work on finding ways to make sure that the compensatory strategies and use of assistive technology that we think is so critical are actually available and usable, successful.
Thank you very much. Looking forward, I understand your data person's not here as were, but something perhaps so lodge with staff as a suggestion, and perhaps Trustee Lyra was going there, and that is, at least retroactively, I imagine that we must have some kind of outcome data for the previous congregated version in terms of pathway enrollment and that kind of thing. It'd be very interesting to do a cost-benefit analysis in terms of how we're doing on some of these measures versus other models for the dollar. In a sense, that might be really interesting, and maybe other comparisons as well. Throughout the report, a great caution is taken in terms of advising people, don't read too much into the stats. We don't have enough data, and I thoroughly accept that. But can I get an indication from staff as to at what point we do expect to have enough data to be able to make firmer judgments, another year or two?
Madam Chair, we're going to offer a few different responses as we go along. We'll certainly take a look at the cost-benefit analysis. I'm not exactly sure, without being able to speak with our program evaluator, what that might look like and whether it's feasible. So we will take that back and under advisement. I know System Principal Kessler wanted to wanted to talk about the piece around the previous program, and then Manager Kay will talk about the final part to your question.
Through you, Madam Chair. With regard to pathways and what we know from our previous model, just to remind members of the board that the previous model was a congregated model that would include potentially students from grade 4 through to grade 8. The evidence that we gathered at the time suggested that the majority of those students proceeded along an adaptive program pathway with deemed to be more limited opportunities to complete a high school diploma, an OSSD. There is research that suggests that when we congregate students who have learning disabilities, that we have to be very cautious about not allowing them to slip back. That in fact it's one of the risks of full-time congregation is not being able to actually support the students in maintaining their abilities across all the curriculum areas. So that is why we'd like the longitudinal data, is to test our hypothesis around the opportunities that are opened up for students as a result of this type of model. Understanding that yes, there are still challenges, but looking to empower students and also teachers so that we have more consistency in the approach to strategy instruction.
Thank you, and Madam Chair, what I'd add to that is we wrestle with that notion of students being held in a safe harbor without those opportunities to challenge and stretch themselves through opportunities through generalization. So those are kind of the two things that we weigh as we go through this process. There would be we are seeing right now that people want to stay for the full 2 years, or are choosing to stay for the full 2 years. And there may be some thinking we need to do around that. But we also have to take a look at long-term outcomes for the children as well, and what future learning opportunities might remain for them. And I'll turn it over to Manager Kay.
Through you, Chair. I'll do my best impersonation of a program evaluator. In terms of, we have already started the development of the next phase of our program monitoring activities. In general, 5 years of data is required for more robust trend analysis. And in terms of the next phase of that program monitoring, a word that Steve McKibben likes to use frequently is participatory. So we certainly do try to satisfy the needs of diverse stakeholder groups and providing them, fulfilling those information needs. So certainly something that staff has an interest in are some of those longitudinal measures that I had referenced in terms of longer term markers of academic achievement. We continue to be very interested in measurements of staff well-being and continuing to leverage that partnership with the University of Ottawa. And certainly throughout this process and the development of these program monitoring plans, we do consult with our LD steering committee and with SEAC.
Great, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thorough responses, so very much appreciated. It gives me a ballpark idea of when the data might be solid enough to draw some conclusions, particularly maybe on math scores and some other things. And last question in 0 seconds is, I note on 97, it suggests that looking at monitoring enrollment patterns in the LD SIP will continue. Though I also notice on 94 that there's a need for increased definition and communication about program goals. And since this attendees participated on a referral basis, I'm not really sure what is meant by monitoring enrollment patterns in the LD SIP. I'm having difficulty understanding that. And that's it. Thank you.
So with respect to enrollment patterns, certainly there's been variability with the number of referrals that have come forward in each year and the number of vacancies in the program. So that is something that we review annually, and again with multiple years we'll be able to see if we have right-sized this program and the average number of students that do come forward. Included within that too are the pathway analysis that we referenced earlier.
Thank you, and I guess developing a profile of the effectively ideal candidate for the program in part, perhaps.
With respect to clarifying definition, that was more to do with the development of the program and certainly bringing the large teams that are associated with the LD SIP, the school teams, the multidisciplinary team, to ensure that we have a shared understanding of the key focus and areas of development for the LD SIP, and ensuring that there are consistency. It is in 7 sites across the district, so ensuring that there is that collaboration and strengthening those program goals based on what we're learning from progress as students as they move through subsequent years.
Thank you.
Trustee Huff.
Thanks to my 2 colleagues, my concrete questions have been eaten up. But as you might be able to tell, I'm on a pontification kind of night here tonight. So what I want to do is say, wow, thank you for taking a question, breaking it down, doing the research, analyzing it, and bringing it back to us. This is exactly what I want to see with regard to our innovative practices, what's going on in the schools. We need to do exactly what you're doing right here. We need to look at designing programs that are based in literature, that have foundation in what we understand about children's learning. The example of generalizability, profound. There's no point in doing something if the kid can't generalize it to the world beyond the space that they are in at that time. Brilliant, thank you. I think that the rigor with which you have addressed this question, bringing on board partners whose job it is to do research, thank you. I'm going to say thank you a lot. For being able to recognize the limitations of the reliability and the validity of the data that you have standing in front of you right now, and have steps for the next phases of your project lined up to be able to tell us what you see as the necessary pieces to bring back to us. Brilliant. The idea of scalability. There's no point in doing any of this if it's always going to stay small scale. That same thing extends when we start looking at innovative practice. If this isn't something that we can actually make scalable, cost-effective, and productive, there's no point anyway, right? So I really do appreciate that you are addressing that you're already having partnerships with and discussion with finance to say, what are we doing here and what is the impact? And I think that it's very profound that you understand the importance of gathering the longitudinal data, because the picture will unfold and emerge as these children progress through the next stages of their time with us as a school board. So big honking kudos. Thank you very much, and please let's, as a board, take this as an exemplar, as a model of how we should be addressing each and every one of the questions that we are going to look at as we move through our strategic plan. Let's do this like scientists. Let's stop relying on just the qualitative. Let's get some numbers. Let's see if we have measurable outcomes and impacts from the decisions we make so that we can move forward in a cost-effective, well-stewarded way for this community. Thank you.
Trustee Penny.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I would echo my colleagues' appreciation of the comprehensiveness of the report. It's very good. I do have a couple questions, though, and I noticed that in your next steps, you're talking about students within the LDSIP program and monitoring the enrollment statistics and that sort of thing. But what I'm wondering is the overall goal of the LDSIP program to give students with learning disabilities strategies, tools to help them manage their school journey beyond the LDSIP program? That was my initial impression. Is that true? And if that's true, do we have a plan to somehow look at the students that have graduated from the LDSIP program, say 2 or 3 years down the road, to see if those strategies that we gave them are sustainable? I did not see that in here, but perhaps I wasn't looking close enough. So if you could help me there.
Madam Chair, that is definitely on our radar moving forward. One of the things we have to do is get enough students who've been through the LD-SIP version of our intervention versus the LD program intervention to gather that longitudinal data, but that is something that is certainly on our radar to do moving forward.
And thank you very much for that, because I do think that, like my colleagues, we are very much concerned about the efficacy of what we're doing. I know that there's a lot of school boards that do a lot of stuff, and some of them don't measure how effective their programs are, and then when the next idea comes along, they tend to jump on that bandwagon. But congratulations on doing this. I see there's good measures here, so let's see how those students do. I'm very interested in seeing that.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would love to repeat everything that the last couple of speakers have said about the quality of the report, but you've already heard that once and I only have 3 minutes. So first question, in terms of the increase in the number of referrals, are these kids who are being referred, what kind of learning experience and placement have they had prior to the referral?
Through your chair, the vast majority of students who do enter our LD-SIP have been in regular programs all the way through to entering LD-SIP.
Thank you for clarifying that. I guess the question that arises for me then is whether we're going to learn something from the LD SIP experience about what might have benefited those students before they were referred to LD SIP, in addition to what is benefiting them as a result of the LD SIP.
Through your chair, and for those members of the board that didn't have the benefit of SEAC earlier this month, one point that did come up through discussion is the full range of supports that were the results and further fostered through the LD review. So we certainly acknowledge and recognize the importance of early identification and intervention. And I think we do have quite a robust and diverse range of supports, specifically in the areas of reading. We have structured and widespread phonological awareness tools for our kindergarten students, collaborations with curriculum services and with regards to LLI, level literacy intervention, and then moving to the Tier 3 support of Empower Reading. In addition to the multidisciplinary support that many of our students who are demonstrating lags in their learning and learning challenges, that they have been able to benefit from those prior to entering the LD SIP. And for the vast majority of students, though that combination of service means that they can remain in the regular class setting and be successful, for a very small group of students, they do need the combination of supports that are available through the LD SIP, with the goal of allowing them to access the secondary pathway of their choosing.
And if I might just add to that, Chair, through you, one of the things that we've worked on with the students in the LD SIP is this whole piece around advocacy and being able to say to a teacher, this is what I need to be able to do the task you've put before me. That's a prime example of something that we could look at scaling up and providing that kind of support to teachers in the regular system. I mean, it's not just simply that, but it is one example of something that speaks to your question earlier.
Thank you very much for that. I did attend the SEAC meeting where this was discussed, and I found a lot of very good questions were being raised at that meeting as well. One of the things that several people expressed concern about was the student and parent observations that it was difficult being in the integrated part. And one of the things that really struck me in the staff response to that question was that it is important for students to learn to manage in difficult situations, because let's face it, all of us face situations where we have difficulty, and we have to acquire the tools that will help us to get through those difficulties, to overcome them to the extent that we can, and come out the other side to the next challenge. So I guess in looking at the placements that the students who've left the LD SIP so far are taking, I am absolutely thrilled to see the higher proportion who are going into regular class or regular with support, as opposed to going into the adaptive programs. I think that is a huge thing, because it opens up so many more opportunities for these students to succeed and to actually be well prepared to continue their education beyond high school as well. So congratulations to all of the people who've worked on this. The original LD review was an extensive and exhaustive and exhausting document, and this continued monitoring is keeping a number of people out of mischief quite a lot of the time, I suspect, as well. So thank you.
Hey, Mr. Kerwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to do this the justice that the LD Association would do if they were here. They're not. They've asked me to communicate some thoughts to all you folks around the table. First, I'd like to say to Peter, Stacy, and Christine, you've done a lot of work here, and I think that was reasonably expressed the other night at SEAC. And we all know that you're trying real hard to help our kids. I want to pick up on a point that Trustee Scott expressed, that we all face some challenges, and this is all about trying to give them a leg up. Well, that's exactly what the SIP LD SIP was created for, was to help these kids who were struggling in the regular system acquire skills to cope. And we found out after year one they needed year two, and that was something we had actually negotiated, if you recall, way back when LD SIP first came to be. I suspect we're beyond year two. We're in the early stages of LD SIP. I think, as Stacy said, it at a minimum 5 years before we could really get to the nub and the facts and the ups and the downs. So clearly LD SIP has to continue and ought to continue. I believe all trustees around the table received the email from the Learning Disability Association dated yesterday, but I think you got it today, so you probably haven't had a chance to review it. I did ask Michael Bates, who's the chair of LDAO, if he could give me some Q's and A's and highlight some points that he would like expressed, his board would like expressed. And if you were able to look at the letter from LD by Michael, it's broken down into essentially program enrollment, program elements, data interpretation. And the three key points that Mike asked me to make under program enrollment is that the LD SIP program is not reaching enough students. Lines 2, 3, and 4 are rather significant of this letter, where he indicates that having approximately only 100 students out of a body of 70,000, that number equates to 0.14% of the student population are receiving LD SIP. LD takes the position that the number of, and we know this at SEAC, and I know the staff knows this as well, that LD are the largest number of student exceptionality as population is concerned in this board. And statistically, I believe that's pretty much a statement across the province and maybe across Canada, but I'm not certain. I just ran out of time. Would you put me at the bottom? Oh, darn, I'm at the bottom, aren't I?
It's a short list. Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. I'd just like to confirm my memory. I think when we passed this reporting was for a 2-year period. Is that correct?
Chair, I don't think there was a commitment to reporting. I think there was a request through SEAC that we create a report like this moving forward. And certainly now we see the value of that, so it's something that we will certainly be looking to continue moving forward.
Okay, that was, I was trying to get to that. You know, it's been mentioned that we need a little more time. I'm just, I thought it was in the motion we passed, so I guess I don't need to move another motion if I can be assured that this may be an annual thing for the next little while. My reasoning for that is, at the time that we passed this, there was also some discussion of this intensive model being used for some of the other exceptionalities. So, you know, at the time we thought it was really important that we understood how this was working out. So with that, as was stated in the document, about 2/3 of the, originally the motion, what was brought to us by staff, it was going to be a 1-year program. We got in 2 years, and the report mentions that 2/3 of the students have done 2 years. I see a head nodding, so I understood that. So I'm wondering, one of the sort of big selling points or one of the things that we thought would be good coming out of this was students would return with coping techniques. So I'm not sure with this many people going for the 2 years how much experience you have of the students who have returned to their home school. And I guess if you can confirm with me, do we allow students who take the LD SIP to remain at the LD Center? So again, I don't know how much, if we have enough students to draw any conclusions from, but the experience that staff is seeing for students who are returning to their home school and how we're able to support them and how they're doing at the home school.
Chair, the trustee's absolutely right. We don't have enough numbers to be able to take a look at that yet. It's on our radar to do moving forward in terms of that longitudinal analysis that we would like to complete. With respect to reporting, we're anticipating probably 2 years to get out our next one. What you see here, and part of what makes this so fulsome, is the culmination of 2 years of research and evaluation of how we're doing, and that would be something that we are planning in the background.
Okay, so I'll put that in the back of my mind and put it in my calendar. 2 years from now, I'll be looking forward to an update of this report. Gee, my thought just went out of my head. It put me back on the list. I'll regroup.
Okay. Trustee Jenikins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a wonderful program. Thank you so much, and it's a great report. My question is regarding the program itself being offered to grades 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. And I also note in the letter today as well from the Michael Bates that there is concern. In grades 1, 2, and 3, those are big years for learning how to read. And so why was the program not initially starting at that point?
Chair, I'll start and then turn it over to Manager Kay for finishing. It is important to recognize that when comments are made about LD being the biggest exceptionality or the biggest learning challenge for kids, that is along a continuum. There's a wide range of need along LD, so some can be many children are very well served without ever needing the intervention of the LD SIP. When we were looking at the age range to develop it, to develop the LD SIP, we were taking into consideration some things like giving time for interventions to occur, taking a look at maturity levels and language development and language readiness as kids come to school. We haven't had an opportunity to go through that letter from LDAO in detail as of yet, but we did have a brief conversation today, and I know I'll turn it over to Manager Kay.
Again, coming back to, through you, Madam Chair, again, coming back to the theme of the diversity of supports that we do have in this district. So certainly another specialized program class that bears mentioning is the language learning disability classes that we do offer across the district. So those, we have primary language learning disability classes that do start in grade 1 and move to grade 3. We do have a smaller number of junior LLD classes. We know with our younger learners that sometimes it is those lagging language skills that have the biggest impact on their academic achievement. We know that the assessment and intervention of speech language pathology is critical, and we know that the earlier that we provide those supports leads to the greatest change in their academic trajectory. So we're very strategic in which supports we offer when to best meet the needs of our diverse students.
Mr. Kerwin.
Thank you. To finish up, and again, targeting the letter from LDAO, under the program elements, Mr. Bates did ask me to point out that some aspects of the program need to be revisited. This is the perspective of LDAO, that students should not be moved around or be expected to graduate out of the program. And as you were inquiring, Trustee, LDAO is of the view that LDSIP should start earlier than grade 5. They're great believers in early intervention is going to get on top of the issue and assist the child as they progress. So LDAO would certainly advocate that it commence sooner than grade 5. Exactly when and where, we haven't gotten to that level of discussion. And given that the school year is over and we did have, as Peter alluded to, limited time to really get into it at SEAC in terms of LD's participation in it, the expectation is that notwithstanding, and it is a report for your information on how things have been progressing thus far, I fully expect that this will be another discussion that will occur at SEAC, and it might even be linked or closely tied to Empower. And I would expect come September, October, something like that, this discussion will finish. So these are the concerns, the comments that have been expressed by LD. I do encourage you to read this letter, and if you have any questions with respect to it, you can either come to me, but I would certainly recommend you contact LDAO. I'm not the person of knowledge base when it comes to this. I'm merely the voice. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to respond initially to that, and then I'll turn it over to Manager Kay. It's important to realize that when we brought forward the notion around an LDSIP, that we presented it as a suite, as a full range of supports and services to students with LD, and I'll turn it over to Manager Kay to talk about that a little bit.
Through you, Madam Chair, a lot of the in-depth analysis that led to the decision-making for the LDSIP, of course, did come out of the LD review, and certainly that allowed us to really deepen that range of supports available to our younger learners beginning in kindergarten. There's certainly risk, and it's not a decision we take lightly when we move a child out of their community school to attend a specialized program class. So we do need time to offer those full range of supports that we do offer in all of our community schools. So it's that important programming and intervention that comes by way of our multidisciplinary teams, our speech-language pathologists, our social workers, our psychologists. It's certainly the tiered intervention and supports that come from the classroom teacher, as well as the programs that we have talked about at length today with some of those more targeted supports that do assist students with some of those lagging skills. Really, when we get to a specialized program class setting, we are looking at the very top tier of that triangle and a very small percentage of children when we are looking at this system-wide, district-wide. And certainly it is a work in progress, and we strive to continue to get the right balance of those services, but we do feel that that continued emphasis on the supports that are available in all of our community schools across the district has the best ability to reach most learners in the ideal setting, which is that often that community school.
Great, thanks. Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. So the hope was that 1 year would be sufficient to provide the skills to these young people. Do you think that as we learn and develop what we're doing, that we may see more students just taking the 1 year to do this, or does it depend on, I'm asking a question, of course it will depend on the students who come to it. Some will have greater challenges than others, but I'm just wondering, generally, would you expect that we would be able to impart the learning of the half-day small class in that year, or should we be considering looking at the 2 years as for most of the students?
Chair, we absolutely don't have enough information to be able to answer that question in a fulsome way. What we do know right now is that most students are accessing a second year. What we don't have yet, and one of the things that's mentioned in the report, is clearly defined exit criteria around at what point do we think a student should be able to leave the support of the LD SIP and be successful in a regular classroom. It speaks to my comment earlier around our struggle right now is that notion of a safe harbor. Right now we see the smaller class of 8 students. Teachers there are having different views of the teacher in the integrated setting. Students are saying there are some challenges with respect to the integrated setting. So we have to turn ourselves now to give some thought to those and what the implications of those might be before we're able to really respond to that.
Thank you. I'd just like I have a few questions around clarifications and understanding on the highlights from the University of Ottawa study. It's on page 92. I guess the first thing to ask on that, is that study available to publicly?
Chair, I'm not sure it is available publicly yet. It is part of a larger research project that Dr. Maria Rogers is engaged in.
Thank you. I'll follow up on seeing how to get that. So in the first bullet under highlights from the university, I just want to confirm that substantially the norm is for the norm for the general population. Yep. And the responsibility and inattention in their specialized class component versus the integration component of the LD SIP. Oh, students a different higher rating, display higher functioning and empathy in the 2 settings. Clarification on that, and then just so I understand that. And students are also rated with higher levels of academic competency in the areas of motivation, engagement, study skills in the specialized class component versus the integrated component in the LD SIP. I'm jumping to the conclusion that they're doing pretty good on these things in the smaller class, but when they go to the larger class, they're finding challenges there. If just confirm my assumptions right, and then what might we do, where do we need some intervention to help that in the regular class?
Madam Chair, I think the interpretation might be beyond what we're able to provide right now. Certainly it appears that the way teachers of the LD SIP look at students and teachers in the integrated, report back on students, and the way the teachers in the integrated setting report back on students, there's a variation there. So what I am not able to determine, and I don't know if Manager Kay is whether that is in reference to the norm that you're talking about. So we would have to go back and take a look at that in a deeper way.
The only thing I'll add to that is certainly all of the measures that Dr. Rogers used in this portion were standardized and normed, and it would be comparison. These measures were given to the LD SIP teacher as well as the integration teachers, and that's where we did see some variance from one setting to the other, which again, I would caution interpretation and jumping to conclusions here. There is always more work to do, but again, it's not necessarily stating that there is not benefit to the integrative setting. It's learning how we can best support students to be successful and to feel confident and capable in those settings, and to better the understanding of our teachers, build capacity so that they are also recognizing the competencies and capabilities of those students despite the increased demands of the regular class setting.
And I'll end it here, but probably have some discussions offline. But I'm wondering, and I thought I heard release time being a challenge, but I'm wondering what would be the first steps that you think should be undertaken to make that reintegration at both the LD SIP facility and at their home school to be successful and to build on the skills that these students have learned in the LD SIP?
Chair, so some of the things we're looking at are ways to enhance the integration teacher's ability to meet the needs of a child during the integration piece. It's something we have to turn a closer eye to moving forward. Things like when students are reporting their assistive technology isn't working the way that they need it to work in order to accomplish a task. What strategies can be put into place in a regular class that might help mitigate that? Things like dividers or something like that, a work carrel, study carrel off to the side. And that's just one example that is pretty low-hanging fruit, if you'll give me that. But the other area that comes immediately to mind is taking a look at ways to explicitly support the social emotional growth of students with LD. Are there things that we can do during their time in their LD SIP experience? So we're looking at things like developing an understanding of what their LD means, developing compensatory strategies that could be transferable to the regular class. What can we augment in that portion that might help support social emotional development for that child to experience success in the regular classroom moving forward? So those are just two of the things. We haven't had the conversation yet around trying to find ways to facilitate improved collaboration, but we are going to be turning our heads to that soon.
And I would like to thank staff for the report. It's a good start to our discussion on this and evaluation. Thank you.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing just occurred to me a few minutes ago, since Mr. Kerwin had mentioned in the Michael Bates LDAO letter that he had given a figure of only 0.14% of all students were being served in the LD SIP. And I'd had a feeling there was something odd about that number because he based it on the entire enrollment, which he had estimated at 70,000. But if you actually look at the number of students in grades 5, 6, 7, and 8, which is the group that we're pulling our 112 out of, the actual number, it's still small, but it's actually somewhere between 0.5% and 0.6%. So I think you just have to be very careful when you're looking at numbers and saying, 1.40, that's shocking. Make sure that you actually are looking at the meaningful pieces of the number. It's easy enough to take the wrong divisor. So,
thank you. And that concludes our discussion on this item. So thank you very much for all of the report and all of that good discussion. And we missed the 9 o'clock break. I'm a bit hesitant to take it now because I think we're almost through this agenda. So hopefully we can all bear through for a few more minutes. I apologize profusely to anybody who's not able to leave the room that I did not take a break at 8:30. But we'll move on to information items. 9.1, do we have a report from our OPSPA representative, Trustee Penny?
Not tonight, Madam Chair.
That's great. There is a new ministry initiative update there for your information. Seeing no questions on that, I'll see if we have a update from the OSTA representative. No, we do not. Great. Is there any new business? Seeing none, I will call us adjourned. Thank you.